Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to welcome my guest today, Morley Sage. Morley is chair of the Stove Industry Alliance, the SIA, and also of the new clearSkies organization. He's been in the industry for many years and was director of Stovax for nearly 30 years, the last 11 years as managing director of the Stovax Group, which he retired from in 2016. So Morley has now his own consultancy business, and so is very much an independent chair of these two organizations. So today Morley has kindly agreed to talk to us about the stove industry and give us some real insights as to what work is being done behind the scenes at a time when wood burning is under some pressure from the media. So Morley, thank you very much for joining us. Much appreciated. Morley, perhaps you could just start by explaining a little bit about the Stove Industry Alliance and the new clearSkies organization.
No, thanks, Nick, for the introduction. The Stove Industry Alliance is the trade association for the stove and fireplace industry. Initially, it was set up by the stove manufacturers, but it's now been expanded to include key component suppliers. We've also got a retail group section, and we've got about 60 retail showrooms that are directly members of the Stove Industry Alliance. And then we have some stakeholder members who have an industry interest and work in conjunction and in association with the trade association. clearSkies is completely different. Although it was initiated by the Stove Industry Alliance as a concept, it's now a completely independent body. And clearSkies is an energy and emissions performance label for stove and fireplace appliances. So the clearSkies label really indicates the emissions and energy performance that that appliance will give.
Okay, and the Stove Industry Alliance, is that just stove manufacturers?
No, as I mentioned, it's broader than manufacturers now. So it's manufacturers, it's key component suppliers, it's fuel suppliers, it's chimney system manufacturers, and also there is a retail group within the Stove Industry Alliance, and we've now got in excess of 60 retail showrooms who are directly members of the Stove Industry Alliance. So it's now a relatively broad church across the whole of the stove and fireplace industry. And to give you an idea, the manufacturers within the Stove Industry Alliance represent between 75 and 80% of the appliances sold in the UK.
Okay, so it's a pretty strong representation then. So there's quite a lot of mention now about Ecodesign stoves. Perhaps you could just explain a little more about these and the relevant sort of regulations, which I believe come into force in, is it 2022?
Yeah, so Ecodesign is European legislation, and that comes into effect on the 1st of January 2022. And the UK government has adopted the Ecodesign legislation. So even though the UK is no longer part of the EU, all of these regulations will apply in the UK from 1 January 2022. They apply to all appliances manufactured after that date. There is a sell-through provision, so retailers and manufacturers can still supply and sell products that were already in the pipeline, i.e. already manufactured and in the distribution chain prior to the 31st of December 2021. Those are allowed still to be sold afterwards, but any newly manufactured appliances must comply with the regs. The regs are a major step forward from where we are at the moment. So at the moment, to get a CE approval, you only have to satisfy two criteria. One is on efficiency and one is on the maximum CO that an appliance is permitted to produce under certain test criteria. The new Ecodesign regulations tighten both of those criteria quite significantly. The efficiency rises by 10% that the appliance has to achieve. to 75%, and the CO permitted to be produced by the appliance reduces by 88%. So it's a massive tightening. It goes from a limit of 1% to 0.12%, which is the measurement criteria under the test. But critically, what Ecodesign also introduces is it introduces 3 further criteria that appliances have to meet in order to be compliant with the forthcoming regulations. And those new criteria are maximum permitted levels of 3 additional emissions, and they are OGCs, which are organic gaseous compounds, PMs, which is particulate matter or fine dust, and NOx, nitrogen oxide. So Ecodesign not only tightens the existing requirements significantly, but it introduces a much wider range of requirements. So an Ecodesign stove is going to be a major step forward in terms of technology and in terms of air quality from existing appliances that don't meet those regulations.
Okay. So you mentioned a little bit earlier about the new organisation, clearSkies. How will the new clearSkies labelling work for wood-burning stoves, and how easy will it be for the consumers to understand it?
That's a good question, Nick. One of the confusing things for consumers is some of the terminology that's out there at the moment, because in addition to Ecodesign, there is something known as Defra exemption. Now, Defra exemption is a test which appliances have to have met in order to be sold and used to burn wood in a smoke control zone. Now, that Defra exemption test is not the same as an Ecodesign test. It's measuring similar things in terms of emissions, but the test methodology is different, and the standards that you need to achieve are different. But strictly speaking, you cannot burn an appliance which is not Defra exempt with wood in a smoke control zone. All of this is quite confusing for consumers, and the whole objective behind clearSkies is to simplify matters and to allow consumers, retailers, installers, chimney sweeps to look at one label, and from one label to know that an appliance meets all of the relevant current requirements. So clearSkies is the only label out there that combines that Defra exemption, which I was just talking about, with the Ecodesign requirements we ran through a little bit earlier. It's really very simple for a consumer to follow. Basically, if an appliance has a clearSkies label, it will be Ecodesign compliant, and it will have been verified independently as being Ecodesign compliant. The clearSkies label has 4 levels within it. There is a level 2, a level 3, a level 4, and a level 5. A level 2 appliance is Ecodesign compliant. A level 3 appliance is Ecodesign compliant and Defra exempt. So if you look for any clearSkies label which is level 3 or above, you know that the appliance is both Ecodesign compliant and Defra exempt. The other thing about clearSkies is it's the only label that goes beyond Ecodesign. So there are lots of schemes out there which are talking about Ecodesign compliance. What clearSkies does at level 4 and level 5 is it challenges manufacturers and appliances to be better than Ecodesign. So a level 4 appliance exceeds the requirements of Ecodesign by 15% and is Defra exempt. A level 5 appliance goes a further 15% improvement. So by the time you're talking about a level 5 appliance, you're talking about meeting emissions levels which are nearly 30% better than the forthcoming Ecodesign requirements. So clearSkies really is the gold standard in terms of appliances, in terms of their emissions and energy performance. And consumer just needs to look for the clearSkies label, and then they know 3, 4 or 5 how good that fire is in terms of its performance against these standards.
Thank you, Morley. That's thanks for explaining that, because it is difficult for people to get their heads around. So that's really helpful. But how do people find out more about this?
Well, clearSkies is an independent body. It has an independent constitution, an independent board of directors, and has an independent company, Kiwa, in the UK, administering the scheme. Full details of this and everything else I've been mentioning are available on the clearSkies website, which is the easiest way to find the information. And that website is www.clearskiesmark.org.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. The Defra Clean Air Strategy claims that 38% of fine particulate matter comes from domestic combustion. Is this correct? And is it mainly from wood-burning stoves?
Well, you're right to sound a little bit skeptical there, Nick, because it sounds a little bit incredible, doesn't it, that 38% of all particulate matter comes from wood-burning stoves. And unfortunately, that is not correct, even though it states it in the Clean Air Strategy, as you say. The way the Clean Air Strategy arrived at this figure was to estimate a volume of wood burnt in the UK, and then to multiply that by something known as emissions factors, which are set out in the National Atmospheric Emissions Inventory, or NAEI, as they abbreviate it to. So two different elements there. The first element, in terms of the volume of wood burned, they based on a user survey that was done in 2014 by Bayes, and that was only based on 1,200 respondents. From that, somehow, they managed to extrapolate that 6 million tonnes of wood is burnt on stoves and fireplaces in the UK. For that to be true, that would be more than half of all of the wood consumed in the UK across manufacturing, construction, packaging, etc. So Defra themselves were aware that this is unlikely. And in fact, if you look at the small print in their impact assessment, they acknowledge that. In 2019, the Stove Industry Alliance did its own survey, done in a very similar way to the Bayes survey, asking very similar questions. And that was based on 10,600 respondents. So a massive increase over the 1,200 that the original survey was based on, and came out with an estimate of 1.85 million tonnes of wood is burnt on stoves and fireplaces in the UK annually. That means that the estimate of 6 million is overstated by more than 3 times. And given these are straight multiplications, that meant the estimate of particulates is overstated by more than 3 times. That 1.85 million tonnes has been further supported by a recent survey done by Kantar for the government, which has estimated that the wood burnt is 1.75 million tonnes, which is very close to the Stove Industry Alliance survey, and clearly indicates the error in the initial assumptions, which the 38% is based on. The second element of this is the emissions factors. And the emissions factors that have been used to calculate the amount of particulate matter coming from wood burners are historical figures which are no longer accurate given the technological improvements in stoves and fireplaces. So if you look at the emissions factors, they actually are, again, more than 3 times, just happens to be the same ratio, but they're more than 3 times the amount that is permitted under the Ecodesign regulations. Well, we know from the statistics that the industry has been keeping that in excess of 10% of the existing stock out there now is Ecodesign compliant. So these emissions factors need updating to reflect current technologies and the nature and makeup of the existing stock which is out there. Defra themselves acknowledge this, and they are on with research to update these emissions factors, but unfortunately they haven't been updated yet. And hence this 38% figure keeps being repeated, but it's categorically not correct. It is a far more reasonable estimate to think that wood-burning stoves and fireplaces account for, it's considerably less than 10% of the particulate matter out there, and it may well even be significantly less than that. The other complexity in this is that the domestic combustion figure has been calculated in another way as well by Defra, but that way includes any wood combustion and anything actually that produces a chemical tracer called levoglucosan, which they've measured. And that includes bonfires, incinerators, outdoor barbecues, pizza ovens. It will also be impacted on by things like wildfires or agricultural prescribed burning and so forth. So there's huge uncertainty about these figures, and the 38% really isn't correct. But unfortunately, the press and media keep picking up on it and citing that wood burners are the biggest contributor of particulate matter, which there is no evidence to support.
Okay, well, thank you for clarifying that, because that's certainly one of the big headlines that, as you say, keeps popping out. But we've also seen some pretty sort of hard-hitting headlines, haven't we, over the last sort of few years? And there's one where, in particular, Dr. Gary Fuller has alleged a wood-burning stove emits the same as 15 diesel cars. Again, that's an extraordinary bold statement. I mean, do you think that's correct?
Well, again, this is unfortunately a poor use of a statistical analysis to compare two things which are not the same. And without wanting to point fingers at anyone specifically on this, we have written to the Air Quality Expert Group, which is the advisory body to the government, explaining why this statement is completely incorrect, and to explain in simple terms why it's incorrect. Really, what they've done here is they have compared two results from a car and from a wood-burning stove, and basically just matched them up and said, well, that's the result for a car, that's the result for a stove. And the multiplication is, you know, a stove would equal so many cars. The thing is, these tests are not the same, and they don't measure the same thing. So the test on a car has been done with a car running at a very slow speed, far slower than most people would be driving at and far slower than the average speed of a car, which is just about its lowest point in terms of production of particulate matter. They've compared that against the test result for a wood-burning stove running at its full nominal rate, which is probably running more strongly than most people would be running their stove, and just about the maximum point that a stove will produce particulate matter at. The second aspect of it is that for the car test, they have only measured particulate matter from the exhaust pipe. So this is only particulate matter coming out of the exhaust. Well, more than half of the particulate matter from a vehicle, whether it be a car or a lorry or a truck, comes from their tires and brakes. And that is completely ignored in this test. So they're not measuring any of the particulate matter from brakes and tires, which are greater than the particulate matter that comes from the exhaust pipe. The third element behind this is that there is no context put behind these tests. So, for example, there is no taking account of the dispersion point of where these emissions arise. You know, if you've got a young child walking along a street, their head level is not so different to a diesel lorry's exhaust pipe. So the particulate matter that is being produced is going straight into a child's sort of face, and therefore there is very little disbursement before it's breathed. Again, if you look at an adult, the level of disbursement is modest before an adult is breathing, you know, the products of that lorry or car going by. If you contrast that with a wood burning stove, which will be venting up a chimney and dispersing, at a relatively high point above the roof line of buildings, the impact of disbursement dilutes particulate matter considerably before it hits the sort of levels at which it'll impact on people. So none of these factors have been taken into account in these tests. It really is comparing apples with pears. And I really just, come back to the common sense point of, does it sound credible to make the statement that we know Gary Fuller has made, which is that burning a wood burning stove is the same as running 8 diesel lorries up and down your street all night? I don't think many people think that sounds credible. And I think it really does a disservice to the whole issue of improving air quality, which we all need to participate in, but there's no point in distorting the facts to try and achieve that.
Okay, no, thanks again for clarifying that, because it is amazing when you see one headline how you can be completely distorted in your view. And I know the Stove Industry Alliance have done, I believe, a very good video, haven't they, just explaining some of the misconceptions, which I'm assuming is on the Stove Industry Alliance website.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You can find that on the Stove Industry Alliance website, and it is a video, as you rightly say, headed "Misconceptions," and it deals with a lot of the things that we're talking about today, but is probably a briefer and more enjoyable watch.
It's nice to have it explained fully, but I know that video does make it very succinct and is just really clear to see. We've talked a lot about stoves themselves and the sort of massive improvements in efficiency, but how important is it to burn the right fuel to reduce the emissions, Morley?
Oh, it's critical, Nick. No, I mean, that's a really important point. The improving the performance of stoves and reducing their impact on air quality is really a threefold thing. It is firstly having the right appliance, and we've mentioned the clearSkies scheme and appliances being Ecodesign compliant as the critical things for appliances. It is absolutely essential to burn the right fuel. Burning the right fuel will have a material impact on the emissions from the appliance, regardless of what appliance it is. And, the recommendation, and in fact, it's coming into legislation through the forthcoming Environment Bill, is that people should burn dry wood, and that's wood with less than a 20% moisture content. There is a very good scheme run by Woodshaw under the Ready to Burn label, and if you look for the Ready to Burn logo on your fuel, that will give you the assurance that wood fuel is below the 20% moisture content. And then if you're talking about smokeless fuel, you want to be looking for low sulfur content in the smokeless fuel, and again, there's going to be legislation coming through on that.
Okay, there's also been some mention, and actually pretty recently in the press, about indoor air pollution. Does the industry have concerns in this area?
I think everyone is concerned about air quality, whether it is internal or external. So the industry is certainly not complacent about air quality, either internally or externally. Do we have specific concerns? We are actively carrying out some further research within the industry. We would welcome other external research of an appropriately considered nature and with an appropriately large enough sample size. There was a recent report that was based on a very small sample size. What early tests and indicative results are showing is that a modern appliance which complies with the Ecodesign or clearSkies label criteria, burning the right fuel, does not create a significant amount of internal air pollution. There are other activities which I think test results are showing are far greater contributors to spikes in VOCs and PMs, particulate matter, internally, such as cooking. such as aerosols and certain cleaning products, candles. Believe it or not, running your toaster isn't very good in this area either. You know, you get quite a significant spike. Cleaning by vacuuming also creates indoor air pollution. And you know, one of the worst things apparently is laying a carpet. So you know, there's a lot of further research needed on indoor air quality. It's not something the industry has a specific concern about, but we remain completely committed to improving the air quality context of all of the industry's appliances, whether that's internal or external.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you for giving some more clarity to that. There's obviously all these issues we've discussed today really obviously is a concern to the wider industry, you know, including ourselves as a supplier of kiln-dried logs. But what's the industry doing to reduce emissions from wood-burning stoves?
Well, I think all the things that we've been talking about, Nick. So if you look at appliances, you know, manufacturers have been challenged to produce lower emitting appliances, and they're doing that through significant improvements in technology. Stoves are now, you know, a fairly precision engineered appliance. They have very tightly controlled aeration systems. They're introducing air in at least 2, often 3, sometimes 4 different ways into the firebox. Baffle arrangements have been improved significantly, which allows greater heat to be retained, which has the impact of creating a second and sometimes a third ignition within the firebox, which burns off the excess hydrocarbons. In terms of fuel and fuel suppliers, you know, people are much more cognizant of the need to produce appropriately dry wood and to source dry wood. You've got smokeless fuels reducing the sulfur content considerably. And then the final element, which shouldn't be underestimated, is also the importance of maintaining and educating consumers on how best to use their appliances. And there's considerable effort going into educational websites and educational material out there to encourage consumers to understand the importance of burning the right fuel, using their appliance in the right way in terms of how they refuel, and also getting their appliances appropriately serviced and maintained and their chimney swept at least once a year.
Okay, so thanks for all that. Finally, really, I actually wanted to ask a sort of general question with regard to climate change, really, you know, being very much at the fore at the moment, and a drive to reduce fossil fuels. So where do you see wood burning in the future?
Well, that's a great question, Nick. And I think, you know, looking at the context of climate change and the challenge for us, you know, across the UK, is to find a genuinely sustainable, low carbon, low emission solution for heating going forwards. And when you put those criteria together, burning wood is a very low carbon. Depending on exactly how the fuel is sourced, it can be carbon neutral, but it's certainly a very low carbon solution. It's definitely sustainable using a renewable fuel source. And as we've been talking, considerable strides are being made in terms of reducing emissions and making it a low emission heating solution as well. So we believe that wood burning should be an integral part of the government's strategy going forwards in terms of reducing the reliance on fossil fuels and in moving us to a much lower net carbon zero solution, which they've committed to. The other importance about wood burning is we see it working in conjunction with some key technologies. So, for example, if you look at heat pumps, which are increasingly being talked about as a future solution, and I think the government strategy is to encourage a greater take-up of heat pumps. Heat pumps are a good solution where you're in a relatively steady state in terms of temperatures, but they are not particularly strong in dealing with significant temperature variation. And we live in a climate where temperatures can vary significantly day to day. And adding in a wood burning stove alongside a heat pump gives you the ability to respond to those short-term temperature changes and also to provide genuine local space heating. And local space heating is important, particularly for those in fuel poverty, because it remains one of the most economic ways of heating space that you're in without any waste, without heating areas that in the house that aren't being used at that particular point in time. And for the fuel poor, that's a very important consideration. And there are plenty of studies out there that show the importance of wood burning in terms of fuel poverty. So we believe wood burning actually has, a fairly bright future once all these things have been understood and put in context. And if the government is committed to finding a sustainable, low carbon, low emission heating future.
Okay, Morley, thank you very much for your time today. It's much appreciated, and certainly great to go through and sort of have a far better understanding of some of the sort of the deeper facts. And I know certainly I've enjoyed listening to all that. And I know at home, with us all working from home just recently, and I am now as well, and just having a wood burn has been fantastic, I must say. So it's a great pleasure.
No, thank you very much, Nick. And I think that is the other element behind it, in terms of, there's been a lot of conversation and discussion about mental health and mental well-being, particularly over the last year, which has been so challenging for so many people. And, I know a lot of people have found, one of the few joys has been having that wood burner going. And actually, you look at the mental health attributes of having a wood burner in terms of a calming, relaxing, helping you de-stress in what has been a very stressful period for a lot of people, but also being a focal point to bring families together, to, bring that sort of family spirit, communication, and just general well-being. So, it sounds a silly point, but it's one that shouldn't be overlooked. So, no, we're very pleased to be able to sort of try and put the points across. No, thank you for your time.
Yeah, no, Morley, thank you very much indeed.